Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Great Mondays Radio. I'm really excited to have on today the Chief People Officer for Dedrone. Her name is Sara Devitt, and she has a lot of experience in the people space, in the culture space, and I'm really excited to dig into a lot of her background and history. She actually headed up people at Hinge as well, which is another big brand. And we want to get into and learn some from experiences that she's had. Sara, thank you so much for coming on Great Mondays Radio.
Thanks, Josh. I'm excited to be here.
So you are the Chief People Officer at Dedrone, and it's a relatively new role for you. And give us a sense. So drones are hot. Drones are a big deal. There's a lot of different companies in the space. What is Dedrone, and what is your mandate? Why were you hired? What do they want from you?
Okay. So Dedrone's vision is to be the market leader in smart airspace security. So everyone thinks of the drones and the devices. We want to make sure that that we protect people, property, and information from the threat of drones while enabling, the good drones to take off. So that's our charter, our mission, and our vision.
Very cool. Very cool. And so you're a new hire. What are some of the things that you've been asked to take on as a Chief People Officer in this burgeoning field at this company?
Yeah, I mean, the company's it's great. The company's doing really well, and with growth comes some, I think, natural challenges and pressure. Things that happen to an organization at certain inflection points. And so AD, our CEO, brought me in to really think about what we're going to need 18 months from now, 24 months from now, while still getting the day-to-day stuff run. And so, when you grow really fast, you tend to grow in silos. It goes from a company of 20 or 30 people who can all collaborate together. But then when you start to add more and more people, people work in their departments and you're not collaborating as much. So we have to figure out, and what I've been asked to do is figure out when are these inflection points happening? What organizational challenges are they going to create? And how do we start to think about, hitting them off of the past, right? We've all seen the story before where you have a company that has a great product, a great team, they're well funded, and they can't pivot and transition through these inflection points because of, what got us here won't get us there. All these, cliches that people say. So I've really been brought in to kind of help figure that out, and that's going to show up, I think, in a number of different ways. Yeah, whenever you join a fast-growing startup, when I was at Industrious or Hinge, even Emotive in the beginning, it's always about hiring, right? How are we going to hire the best people? And we've got, we're successful, and we want to bring in all these roles. And, with that comes all these other things that you have to think about too. So I think thinking about it really holistically and not just who are we hiring or what leadership programs are we doing. I think you have to have a really integrated talent and people strategy to hit those inflection points, head on.
I can't even tell you how many times I've been asked, how do you scale a culture? It seems to be one of these wicked problems that folks are surprised by. And so I'm pleased to hear that the CEO has that vision for it, right? And that's really important.
Yeah. It's interesting. The way I like to think about it is, I've heard this said before, and I say, you're going to have a culture. It's whether you choose to manage it or not.
Exactly.
And so let's make the choice to actively manage it. And everyone thinks that it's a vibe, right? And,
right.
Vibe, it's, we offer lunches every day for our employees, or we have a beer pong tournament in the warehouse after work, and all these different things. And that is not what culture is. I think that's what your employer experience could be, or your workplace experience, but it definitely isn't culture. Yeah. And so I think that what I like to do is always start with any leadership team that I've worked with, is to really define what it is. And a lot of this role, and I think a lot of people that are in this role, a lot of our job is education on what culture is and what it isn't. And educating the team and the company that you can manage this really well. And this is why we're doing these things, right? Like we have a compensation philosophy of X because we're trying to drive Y. right? Or we have a performance management process that we do, twice a year versus once a year. And this is why, because it's going to drive this type of behaviors. And so I always like to anchor in a common language, a way to talk about it, and so that everyone's clear about the words, because that's where I think it goes off the rails first, is people use words interchangeably. People use culture to really define a whole set of things. And culture is actually something very specific. There's a definition by Carolyn Taylor from, and I think she borrowed it from someone about what culture is. And it's the patterns or behaviors that you allow or don't allow over time, right? It's truly how you begin to operate.
Yeah, that's great. I was gonna ask you, what are the words that you use? I like to dial in or really point to choices and decisions. So cause and effect of decisions that organizations make, right? And to me, that tends to anchor people in, oh, wait a minute, you're talking about how everybody acts regardless of what role they're in or what it might be. So I think we're on the same page. And you are at this key inflection, one of those inflection points, right? You shared that there's Dedrone has 150 employees and growing. And that to me that's what I have discovered as well. There's sort of, I borrow from Dunbar's number of like 150 is kind of the limit, but mostly in organizations between 50 and 100 is really where those silos start to create because of relationships and the limitations of the energy that we have, right?
Yeah, I always say, and I think the other thing that I would say is critical from the beginning of any culture journey is the role that leaders play in it. I always say a CEO casts a long shadow, but as the organization gets bigger, that shadow isn't able. So you have to really, really, hire and create expectations around your leadership teams and your managers on how they are actually the biggest impact to what culture you're going to have. Right. Because when you can get everyone in one room and the CEO can say, this is what we're doing and this is why we're doing it, or this is how we're going to show up. That's easy, right? It's as you get bigger that's what makes it really hard to scale culture. And if you don't bring in the next level down and the next level down and ask them to be the people that drive the culture, it's going to fail. It's going to be, I always say it's going to be words on a wall, right? We all seen it. I think Enron had integrity and
that's right,
in
of
its
course.
value statement, it doesn't mean anything unless it's lived and kind of managed, like I said, every day. And you do that through great managers and great leaders.
Yeah, well, I mean, you have a very holistic view, which I appreciate, and probably it was hard won. Let's rewind the clock a little bit. When did you first realize the importance of culture? Was there a moment that you can call on and earlier in your career that you're like, oh my gosh, this is all just fell apart because whatever it might be?
I think I am like a classic, like consumer. I was a classic consumer of cultures in my career. Like you kind of knew it, like when you worked at different places, like, oh, this is the way this place operates, or this is the way this place operates, or this is what's allowed here. And you kind of know that's what the culture is. You just didn't know the name for it. And you didn't know why it was the way it was. Right. I would say it wasn't until I went to Health First. And interestingly enough, I didn't grow up in HR. I don't have an HR background. I spent 10 years of my career at Harvard Business School Publishing. I was in consulting, and I worked with a lot of companies, and I always knew the companies that I really loved working with. And looking back now, I know why, because they had really strong cultures that were, high performing, and that they were, just really good cultures. It wasn't until I went into Health First and I worked for the Chief Human Resource Officer there, Sean Kane, who he was, I would say, more visionary. He peek around corners with culture stuff. He's been talking about this for, before it was popular. And he had a very strong point of view on it. And I was doing a consulting project there, and he said, after we worked together for a couple months, he says, why don't you come in and run organizational effectiveness? And I said, I'm not HR. He said, exactly. He's like, I want someone that comes from the business side, that this stuff we can really make sure. And that's the other thing. If it's not geared towards and managed towards what the business outcomes are, it just becomes an HR thing, right? It just becomes this thing that the people teams doing, that HR team is doing versus, versus coming from the business. And so that was my first foray into it, and just learning from him, and actually, doing a series. I was there for, I think, over 6 years, where we defined the culture that we needed. We were very intentional about what we needed, and we did that based on what the strategy was of the organization. And that's always the first step, is can everyone in the company clearly articulate what our strategy is, or what our common goal is? And if not, you have to start there. And then we asked ourselves, okay, if our goal, at the time, to be the preeminent health plan in our market by 2020, this is going back to 2013 or 2014. If everyone didn't understand that, we had to align everyone. And then we had to ask ourselves, what are the things that we have to preserve that make us unique and competitive in the market, but what are the things that we need to start introducing, right? And so it became this company-wide way of defining the culture that we need. And we came out with these 5 culture drivers. I probably could remember them off the top of my head, but there were things like dream big, plan wisely. And that was to capture the essence of this organization that had done amazing things in healthcare for 20 years. But what we didn't do a great job of was planning and along the way. And so that culture driver reflected those types of behaviors of preserving something that was really unique and special, but also making space for new ways of operating. So that was really, I'd say, when I first got it. And then since then, that's when I pivoted my career to say, no, I actually want to do this, full time. And because I can see the impact that it has. And it's not an initiative, and it's not a program. It is a multi-year journey that requires, a lot of things. And, actually the CEO, Justin McLeod of Hinge, said, he challenged me when I was at Hinge to say, I want you to think about your work almost like you're putting a product out there. Right? Like, how does product get developed? And are you doing your research? And are you, understanding what the user needs are? And are you testing? And, and all that type of stuff. So to think about it in that way.
I love that. It's I feel like you've been reading from my notes, or maybe I've been reading from yours. I love when you were talking about those culture drivers, to me they sound like, or at least the way that I think about values, where you're able to establish 3 to 5 the most important behaviors that you want to start to incentivize. Yes. Is that how you thought about them, or was that the values were different?
No, our values were how we operated, right? And I've seen different models where some people have, values and then tenets or culture tenets. Yeah. What at Hinge they had, basically we called them table stakes. Like, no matter what the company was doing or what the strategy was, there were these 3 things, that we wanted all employees to have. And that was authenticity, courage, and empathy, right? Culture is, if it is a direct correlation and if it is in service of your strategy, your culture has to change as your strategy does. Yep. Right. So as we talked about, if your culture is one thing for 50 people and you're not looking at it, if you're going multi-product, and if you're a one product company going multi-product, that changes the dynamics of a company. If you're going
one office, multiple offices.
Right. As the business changes, and as your market opportunity changes, as your customers change, all of that stuff. If you are not pressure testing your values against them, how you operate, then you're kind of doing a disservice, and you're using this old way of operating. And so you should have those things that are table stakes and true and enduring, and almost, I call it like the soul of the company, but the values become a direct response to what you're trying to achieve.
Exactly. I feel like there are many organizations, and many of them kind of, I would say, old guard organizations, that think about their values as immutable. They have to be exactly what they've always been. And I think it's honestly, I think it's a waste, because like you said, they need to shift. And I believe that companies need to look every 2 to 3 years at their values and say, what is it we're focusing on? Because there's only so many frameworks or tenets that an employee can absorb.
Yeah. No, it's true. And that's why I think, to my earlier point, right, language is important, and defining if we're going to use values in this way, let's use values in this way. If we're going to use culture in this way, we have to be consistent, because it can create so much confusion and chaos and, assumption pointing, or, across.
Let's get clear.
You have to be very clear. And the way I like to think about it is strategic planning and culture work have to be tied together. So as you're doing your strategic planning, your value kind of review should be done as part of that process.
Yep.
It
Yep.
goes, hand in hand with that.
I want to go back to what you said before, because it occurred to me that it's not something that I've talked about a lot, but I think it's really important, which is how does X cause Y? Because often it will be, hey, you might call a peer, what's the best recognition program, best way to recognize people, or hey, what's the best way to do X, Y, and Z, whatever it might be. And what you're describing is that there's a lot of ways, there's a lot of best practices, but I don't feel like enough people are thinking about the outcome that they want. I wonder if you could, in the context of culture, are you able to describe, since we have this incredible opportunity, you've been at a lot of different organizations, are you able to describe the kind of culture that maybe some of these organizations had and how they were different, and therefore we could kind of have a conversation about how you drive that in a different way, right? I think the classic is sort of like, are you innovative or are you efficient, right? Those are very different things.
I would say, everything comes down to context, right? When you are, at the time, a $12 billion health insurance company in New York City serving, the most vulnerable population, that's very different than a co-working company like Industrious or a dating app. You go from a real estate product, a health insurance, to a real estate product, to an app, to a SaaS company. There's just inherent uniqueness to the challenges that they face, right? I would say, a very large health insurance company, it's very much driven by, you're regulated, right? And so there's that whole thing, limitations that it puts on you. You've got a bunch of legacy systems, that you have to figure out how your technology is going to evolve. You move at a much different pace than, let's say, an app that features and functions get moved all the time, right? So the speed in which an organization moves impacts it. The markets that you serve, the products that you have, is also very different. The way I like to think about it is, I always like to say, how are you going to win in the market? Because I'll say this: you can replicate a business plan, you can replicate a product.
Yep.
You can always get access to money and capital, maybe not as much as you used to, but the one thing that you can't actually copy and replicate is a company culture.
Sing it, sister. Sing it. Oh my God.
So if you look at it as the thing that makes you unique, and if you actually look at your culture as a competitive advantage, you have to say, how are we going to win in the market, right? What are the things that we need to win in the market? And so there's a hotel chain that I love that is well known for customer service, right? Well, guess what? How they source their candidates, the interview questions that they ask, how they onboard folks, how they do performance management, how they pay and reward, how they promote folks. It's all through the lens of the outcomes of customers. Right. So when you are hiring, they ask you assessment questions and interview questions on your propensity to be customer focused. Right. The onboarding experience is all through the lens of a customer. Right. In your performance review plans, you get assessed. There's a whole index on how well you serve the customer. Now, if you're in HR, who is your customer? It's everybody else. So there's ways you have to manipulate it. You look at a company that everyone talks about, companies like Goldman or McKinsey and a lot of the consulting and the big finance firms, they are achievement cultures, right? They pay very differently than companies that are trying to foster teamwork. They're achievement cultures. They pay top of market. They recruit, from very specific, places. And it's just because that's the outcomes that they need for the products that they sell and that they put in the market, versus let's say a hotel chain who they win in the market through being focused on the customer and then designing the entire employee life cycle through that lens.
One of the areas that I'd love to get your opinion on is, and I love this idea of winning in the market. I think that's a great frame, right? Let's start from that point, because you can answer it all sorts of different ways. And then you also said, well, in HR, your customer is everybody inside the company, right? How
I
do you,
like that. I hate when it's like you're the support, like, because there's different, organizational models where it's like, oh, the support functions, finance,
yeah,
HR.
yeah.
It's not, we are actually part of the business. Another lesson that I learned at my time at Health First. And so I
Yeah.
say more kind of loosely, because that is a little bit of a hot button for me.
I appreciate that. I love it. I love hitting the hot buttons. We can get some real good answers. I'm curious about larger organizations and how the culture of different parts of the organization are different from one another. And do you have an observation about how each of them can set their own context, right? I don't know that. I mean, I don't know. Would you say, I mean, I guess in sales, it would be, how can we win? That's kind of traditional, but in HR, I don't know. It's like, how do we win with this in this company? I don't know what that might be. So what is your thoughts about the differences between the cultures of larger organizations, and how do you frame it in that same way? Because that's so clarifying for the
Yeah.
organization at large.
Well, I think the win is defined by how the company wins, right? And so if it's a big company and you've got a share price that you're trying to drive for, shareholders, winning that's your outcome. And then you have to back into that, right? So what that means for HR is not my internal customers. How we as X company win in the market is by saying our share price has to do this. We need this amount of revenue. What does that mean for sales? What does that mean for product? What does that mean for here? What's the type of HR and people function do we need to be in order to drive that, right? Because you are all a part of it. And I think when you separate some of these other business units, it's not in support of, it's actually in service of. That
Okay.
is clear.
Yeah. That's good. So one click further, the question I often get, and I would love your take on it, is how do I build the culture of my team if the larger organization or my leaders don't buy into it? They're not aligned. That's not what they're focused on. How might you advise?
I think you have to understand what you can control and what you can't control within an organization as a leader, right? So you may not be able to say, I want to give everyone raises, and pay them X, and have this compensation philosophy that is outside of what, the company is doing. In a lot of cases can't happen.
That's right.
So understanding what you have the ability to control and what you don't have the ability to control is critical. That's first. Right. And so what I mean by that is, you can be a great leader. Right. And I think in spite of an organization around you that doesn't maybe value it. And I think you do that through in the absence of having a consistent and clear culture of a bigger organization, you can kind of create your own, but then you're going to have separate cultures. And that's when companies just don't do well. Like I'm a big believer that you have to have one. Right. You can have rituals and you can have, different, things of ways you do things and, ways that you communicate, maybe a little bit different on different teams, but the expectations that you have should be consistent. And so a leader like that, I would say control what you can. And in those things that you can control, set the example of how it should be. And you'd be really surprised. And I've seen this happen a number of times where, someone comes in, they're a great leader. They they create their own, expectations for their employees in the absence of it. They start doing performance reviews in the absence of the company doing it. And all of a sudden they're performing really well. And everyone around is like, what are you doing over there?
How do I get some of that?
Exactly. And so I think it's leading by example, and that's sometimes hard to do, but you do have control over, how you operate, what the expectations you have of your team, how you grow and develop your team. If you can't change their compensation, maybe it's a job, rotation. Maybe it's one of these things that you can do as a leader to grow and develop them.
Love it.
Yeah.
Great. All right. So I like to wrap up our conversations with a question about a win or a fail that you have learned from, something that is just kind of a big moment, something that you remember, whether because it was good or bad, and what you learned from it that we could learn, that all of our listeners can learn from.
I think I'll start with the fail. Well, there's a lot, it's funny when you there's, and it's like you just refine yourself as you get better.
Of course.
Never arrive anyway. So we're always trying to improve.
Yep.
I think for me, when I first, as I mentioned, right, when I first moved into the people HR space, I didn't have an HR background. And so I made a lot of, I think, classic mistakes that I think I see a lot of HR folks make, is they know what the answer is. And they're just like, here's the answer, just do it, and when you're a consultant, you're getting paid for people to tell you're paid to tell them what to do.
Yeah.
They listen.
Because they're paying you.
When you're internal and you're like, we have to launch this, and this is what the amount of, and I think I touched on this before, the amount of work you have to do. And this is where I failed, when I first was at Health First, I was like, I had this great idea for a leadership program, and I had it all in my head, and I mapped it out, and I had a project plan, and I was like, isn't this the greatest thing ever? And then there are questions about it. People wanted to say in the content. I was so deflated, because in my mind, it's like, I knew the answer, and everyone else just didn't get it. And it was like, oh, that's a really challenging place to be, because you don't want to be that person. Number one, like your job is to say, all right, I've gone down this path. I understand this, right? Let me go back and bring people along on that journey. And I think the biggest thing is stakeholder management, to be quite honest, with anything that you want to do in culture. We can sit here and we can talk for hours about techniques and ways to do it, and how this company does and that company does it, and all this kind of stuff, and the ways to impact culture. But if you do not have that stakeholder management, and you do not have people that are your partners in this, that you bring them along, you talk to them about it, a lot of the stuff is done over a coffee or, a drink after work. And you have to be the biggest educator in the company of what it is, why it matters, and how you want to approach it. And then once you do that, then you start to get a little bit more ability to start demonstrating, how it works and why it works and all that stuff. So you've got to be a bit fearless, know that, like, I always say in this role, like, I want to be like the favorite history teacher that everyone had in high school. It's like, at the time you're like, oh, this is so annoying. But then when you leave here, you're like, wow, I learned how to manage, and I learned how to do these things. So I think I tried to launch a few things early in my when I was doing culture work, that I think I didn't have the buy-in, and I didn't do the stakeholder management piece that was so critical up front. And that's definitely something that I learned from, and, really, really pay attention. I'll put a lot of thought and attention into how I spend my time there now with my colleagues and peers and things.
That's the hard work. That's, to me, that's, of course, right? Like, I have all these brilliant ideas, it's like, I know what the answer is, but it doesn't matter. One of the, anybody who has listened to me, speak or read the book or whatever, understands that the thing that I share the most, the sort of the super secret, maybe not so secret, but the most effective tool is recruiting culture ambassadors. And that's how we get the executive team to nominate high potentials or culture ambassadors, so that they have the kind of approval or charter of the leadership team, and then they can come back and present, because who the hell am I as a consultant from the outside?
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I've done culture committees. We had one at Health First, we had one at Industrious, we had one at Hinge, we had one at Motive, and we're going to be starting one here. And what I would add to that is not only include the people that get it and will be advocates for it, including some of the people that don't get it and are a little bit on the fence. Because if you put them in the center of this work, right, and if you manage your committee really well, you start to get you get better insights as to what's going to work and what's not. You know what I mean? Like and then surveying and really listening to the employees on how you're doing on this, but always having those voices in the room of people that are farther along on the journey as part of your committee, that you're going to get the best feedback to have things that are designed and, impactful to the organization.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that. It's something that I'm taking away from this conversation. Absolutely. This has been really incredible. Sara Devitt, Chief People Officer of Dedrone, DEDRONE.com, correct?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, good. And I really appreciate your time and energy and your wisdom here. This has been phenomenal. And I feel I feel a kinship because there's a lot of things that you're saying and you're just sort of rounding out some of my knowledge. So thank you for educating me and sharing with the audience here. I appreciate it.
This was fun. Thanks so much, Josh. I appreciate it. Okay.